Marcus Chen wiped the sweat from his forehead as he finished preparing the evening meal for the crew of the merchant vessel. Prosperity. The small galley kitchen barely had enough room for one person, but he made it work. Steam rose from the pots as he stirred the protein stew, adding just the right amount of spices to make the synthetic ingredients taste almost real. Captain Valoris entered the galley, her blue skin glistening under the harsh lighting. The Zentari captain had hired Marcus 3 months ago, when their previous cook had quit at the last station. She watched him work with curiosity, noting how his hands moved with unusual precision when handling the cooking knives. "The crew speaks highly of your meals. Human," she said, her voice carrying the musical tone typical of her species. "They say you make even emergency rations taste like delicacies." Marcus smiled modestly, keeping his eyes on his work. "Just doing my job, Captain. Good food keeps morale up, indeed. Though I must ask, where did you learn such skills? Your resume was quite minimal." The knife in Marcus's hand paused for just a moment before continuing its steady chopping motion. "Here and there. I've worked on many ships over the years." Captain Valoris nodded, though something in her expression suggested she wasn't entirely satisfied with the answer. As she turned to leave, the ship's proximity alarm suddenly blared throughout the vessel. Red lights flashed as the emergency broadcast echoed through the corridors. "All hands to stations. Unknown vessels approaching." "This is not a drill." Marcus set down his knife and looked toward the ceiling as heavy footsteps thundered past the galley. Through the small porthole, he could see the dark shapes of 3 warships closing in on their position. Their design was unmistakable. Korthak raiders, known throughout this sector for their brutality and their policy of taking no prisoners. The ship shuddered as the first warning shots fired across their bow. Captain Valoris's voice crackled over the intercom, tension clear in her musical tones. "This is Captain Valoris of the merchant vessel Prosperity. We are carrying standard trade goods and pose no threat. Please state your intentions." The response came in the harsh, guttural language of the Korthak, followed by a translation from the ship's computer. "Prepare to be boarded. Resistance will result in immediate execution of all crew members." Marcus continued chopping vegetables, his movements steady and calm, even as the ship around him erupted into panic. The other crew members, 2 Zentari engineers, a Pelton navigator, and a human communications officer, were all trained for this scenario, but merchant vessels rarely survived encounters with Korthak war parties. 20 minutes later, the airlock hissed open and heavy boots clanged against the metal flooring. The Korthak boarding party moved through the ship with military precision, their reptilian features twisted into expressions of cruel anticipation. These weren't desperate pirates. They were professional raiders with advanced weapons and armor. Marcus heard them gathering the crew in the main cargo hold. Captain Valoris's voice remained steady as she tried to negotiate, but the Korthak weren't interested in deals. They wanted everything, the cargo, the ship, and probably the crew as slaves for their mining operations. "Search every compartment," growled the boarding party leader, his scarred face visible through his helmet's visor. "Kill anyone who resists." 2 Korthak soldiers made their way toward the galley, their plasma rifles held ready. They found Marcus still at his station, calmly dicing an onion with mechanical precision. The soldiers looked at each other in confusion. "You," one of them barked in broken galactic standard, "move to cargo hold with others. Now." Marcus looked up from his cutting board, his brown eyes meeting the soldier's gaze without fear. "Just finishing up dinner. Would you like some? I make excellent stew." The Korthak warrior's face twisted in anger at what he perceived as mockery. He raised his rifle, finger moving toward the trigger. "I said move, human scum." "I heard you," Marcus replied, his voice still calm. His hand continued moving the knife, but now the onion had been replaced by a piece of synth meat. "But I really should finish this first. Waste not, want not, as they say." The second Korthak soldier moved closer, his weapon trained on Marcus's chest. "This one is either very brave or very stupid." "Probably stupid," the first soldier agreed. "No matter. Dead humans cook just as well as live ones." As the soldier's finger tightened on the trigger, Marcus's hand moved. The knife left the cutting board in a blur of motion, spinning through the air with impossible accuracy. It struck the first soldier's rifle, severing the power coupling and causing the weapon to spark and die. Before either Korthak could react, Marcus was already in motion. His second knife found the gap in the first soldier's armor with surgical precision, while his left hand caught the second soldier's rifle barrel and twisted it aside. The plasma bolt that should have killed him instead burned harmlessly into the galley wall. Both Korthak warriors hit the floor within seconds, unconscious, but alive. Marcus stood over them, breathing calmly as he retrieved his knives and wiped them clean on a kitchen towel. "Sorry about that," he said to the unconscious soldiers, "but I really do hate being interrupted while I'm cooking." From the cargo hold, he could hear Captain Valoris still trying to negotiate with the remaining raiders. There were at least 6 more Korthak on board, all of them experienced fighters with military-grade equipment. Any reasonable person would have tried to find a way to escape or hide until help arrived. Instead, Marcus walked to a locked cabinet and withdrew a leather roll that contained his personal knife collection. Each blade was perfectly maintained, sharp enough to cut through molecular bonds and balanced to perfection. He selected 3 throwing knives and a curved blade that resembled an ancient earth kukri. As he made his way through the ship's corridors toward the cargo hold, Marcus allowed himself a small smile. It had been 3 years since he'd last been forced to reveal his true nature. He'd honestly hoped to keep his cover longer this time. The Korthak had made a simple mistake that countless others had made before them. They'd assumed that a human working as a cook on a merchant vessel was exactly what he appeared to be: harmless, weak, and utterly beneath their notice. They had no way of knowing that Marcus Chen had once been the deadliest assassin in human space, trained in techniques that were banned on 12 different star systems. They couldn't know that his retirement to merchant cooking was actually an exile imposed by the Terran Council after his methods had been deemed too dangerous even for wartime use. As he approached the cargo hold, Marcus could hear the Korthak leader threatening his crewmates. The captain was doing her best to keep them alive, but these raiders weren't known for their patience or mercy. Time to get back to work. The cargo hold of the Prosperity had been converted into an impromptu prison. Captain Valoris knelt on the cold metal floor alongside her crew, their hands bound behind their backs with energy restraints. The Korthak leader, a massive warrior with ritual scars covering his neck and arms, paced before them like a predator sizing up its prey. "Your cargo manifest lists standard trade goods," the leader growled, his translator device rendering his words into harsh galactic standard. "But our scans detect refined quantum crystals in your hold. Military grade. Very valuable." Captain Valoris kept her voice steady despite the fear she felt. "Those crystals are for civilian use, power cells for remote colonies. We have all the proper documentation." The Korthak warrior backhanded her across the face, sending her sprawling. "Do not lie to me, Blueskin. These crystals can power weapon systems. You are gun runners." The ship's communications officer, a young human named David Park, tried to help the captain sit up. One of the guards struck him with the butt of his rifle, and David collapsed with a groan. "Enough," the leader commanded. "We take the ship, the cargo, and you slaves will work the mines of Korthak Prime until you die. This is generous. Usually we space merchants who transport weapons." The Zentari engineer, an elderly female named Tessara, looked up at their captor with defiance in her large eyes. "You cannot simply claim merchant vessels. The Galactic Trade Council will—" "The Trade Council has no power here," the leader interrupted. "This is Korthak space now. We take what we want." As if to emphasize his point, he gestured to his warriors. 2 of them began setting up portable holo transmitters while the others continued searching the ship. The leader intended to broadcast their capture as a warning to other merchants. Stay out of Korthak territory or face the same fate. "Where are the other 2? One of the warriors asked, checking his scanner. "Manifest shows 7 crew members. We have only 5 here." The leader's scarred face twisted into a frown. "Find them, now." Before any of the search party could respond, the lights in the cargo hold flickered and went out. Emergency lighting cast everything in an eerie red glow as the ship's systems automatically switched to backup power. "What is happening?" the leader demanded. One of his warriors spoke rapidly into his comm unit, trying to contact the boarding party members who had remained on their own ship. Static was the only response. "Sensor sweep," the leader commanded. "Full spectrum." The warrior with the scanner began working frantically, but the device showed nothing unusual. No life signs moving through the ship. "Everyone is accounted for in this room." That was when they heard the scream. It came from somewhere deep in the ship's corridors, a sound of pure terror that was abruptly cut short. The Korthak warriors raised their weapons, their reptilian eyes scanning the darkened entrances to the cargo hold. Probably just one of my people stepping on a loose deck plate, the leader said, though his voice carried less confidence than before. Continue the search. Another scream echoed through the ship, this one closer. Then silence returned, broken only by the hum of the ship's engines and the nervous breathing of the captured crew. Captain Valoris caught David's eye and saw her own confusion reflected there. The ship's manifest did show 7 crew members, but the 7th was just their cook. A human civilian who'd joined them 3 months ago and had never shown any signs of combat training. A third scream rang out, followed by the distinctive sound of a plasma rifle discharging. Then nothing. Squad leaders report, the Korthak commander spoke into his comm unit. His voice remained steady, but Captain Valoris noticed that his grip on his weapon had tightened. Static answered him. Fall back to defensive positions, he ordered his remaining warriors. Something is picking off our boarding party. The 4 remaining Korthak soldiers formed a circle around their prisoners, weapons pointed outward toward the cargo hold entrances. Their leader activated a personal shield generator, the energy field shimmering around his massive form. Probably ship security systems, one of the warriors suggested. Some merchants have automated defenses. No, Captain Valoris said quietly. The Prosperity doesn't have any weapon systems. We're a civilian merchant vessel. The leader struck her again, but there was less force behind the blow this time. Silence. A new sound reached them. Soft footsteps moving through the ship's corridors with deliberate slowness. Not the heavy boots of Korthak warriors, but the quiet tread of someone who knew exactly where they were going. Show yourself, the leader bellowed into the darkness beyond the cargo hold. Face us with honor, or we begin executing prisoners. The footsteps stopped. Then Marcus Chen walked into the cargo hold, still wearing his cook's apron. His hands were empty, and he moved with the casual gait of someone taking a leisurely stroll. He looked completely unremarkable, just a middle-aged human with graying hair and laugh lines around his eyes. The Korthak warriors swung their weapons toward him, but their leader held up a hand to stop them from firing. You are the missing crew member, he observed. A cook. That's right, Marcus replied pleasantly. Sorry I'm late. Had to finish cleaning up in the kitchen. The leader studied this ordinary-looking human with growing suspicion. My warriors who went to search your section, where are they? Oh, them? Marcus smiled apologetically. I'm afraid they had a bit of an accident. Kitchen work can be dangerous if you're not careful around sharp objects. The lead Korthak's eyes narrowed. You killed them. Well, yes, Marcus admitted, as if discussing the weather. But only because they interrupted my cooking. I really don't like being interrupted while I work. One of the warriors laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the cargo hold walls. This soft human thinks he can threaten us. I will enjoy watching him die slowly. Marcus tilted his head thoughtfully. You know, I've heard that before. Never quite works out the way people expect, though. The leader raised his plasma rifle, the weapon's targeting system painting a red dot on Marcus's chest. Last words, cook? Actually, yes. Marcus's expression grew serious for the first time. I should probably mention that I used to have a different job before I became a cook. Didn't end well, really. That's why I'm out here flipping synthetic steaks instead of... He paused, seeming to consider his words carefully. Well, instead of doing what I'm about to do to all of you. The leader's finger moved toward his weapon's trigger, but Marcus was already moving. The knife appeared in his hand as if by magic, not thrown this time, but held in a reverse grip as he closed the distance between himself and the nearest Korthak warrior. The plasma bolt that should have killed him passed harmlessly through the space where he'd been standing a microsecond before. His blade found the gap between helmet and armor with surgical precision, and the warrior dropped without a sound. Before the others could react, Marcus was among them, his movements flowing like water around their clumsy attempts to track him with their weapons. Each strike was economical, precise, and absolutely lethal. Captain Valoris watched in stunned silence as her mild-mannered cook dismantled an elite Korthak boarding party with techniques she'd never seen before. He moved like a dancer, every motion calculated to maximum effect with minimum effort. Within 30 seconds, only the leader remained alive, his personal shield the only thing keeping Marcus's blades at bay. What are you? The Korthak leader demanded, backing toward the wall. Marcus straightened his apron and smiled politely. Like I said, I'm just a cook. The shield generator sparked and died, overloaded from repeated impacts. The leader's eyes widened in terror as he finally understood what he was facing. "Please," he whispered. "I surrender." "Sorry," Marcus replied gently, "but you threatened my friends, and I really don't like that." The silence in the cargo hold was deafening. Captain Valora stared at the bodies scattered around Marcus, her mind struggling to process what she'd just witnessed. The mild-mannered cook who had served them meals for 3 months had just single-handedly eliminated an entire Korthak boarding party with a level of skill that defied belief. Marcus knelt beside her and carefully cut through her energy restraints with a small utility knife. His movements were gentle now, completely at odds with the lethal precision he displayed moments before. "Are you hurt, Captain?" he asked, his voice carrying the same concerned tone he used when asking if anyone wanted seconds at dinner. No," she managed, rubbing her wrists where the restraints had chafed. "Marcus, what just happened? Who are you really?" Before he could answer, David Park groaned and sat up, blood trickling from where the rifle butt had struck his temple. Marcus immediately moved to examine the wound, his fingers probing with practiced expertise. "Mild concussion," he diagnosed. "You'll have a headache, but nothing serious. Try not to move too quickly for the next few hours." As Marcus freed the rest of the crew, Captain Valoris noticed details she'd somehow missed before. The way he moved wasn't just graceful, it was purposeful, economical, like someone who'd spent years training every muscle for maximum efficiency. His hands, which she'd assumed were soft from kitchen work, bore faint scars that spoke of a very different kind of training. "The other Korthak ship," Tessara said weakly, accepting Marcus's help to stand. "They'll be wondering why their boarding party hasn't reported in." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Good point. David, can you access their communications from here?" The young communications officer looked confused but moved to one of the fallen Korthak's comm units. "I can try, but their encryption, use frequency 7749.2, Marcus said casually. "Military override code is usually their ship designation followed by Alpha 77. Should get you basic access." David stared at him. "How do you know Korthak military protocols?" "Lucky guess," Marcus replied with a slight smile. "What are they saying?" David worked at the device for several minutes before successfully breaking the encryption. Korthak voices filled the cargo hold, their harsh language rendered into galactic standard by the translator. "Boarding Team Alpha. Report status immediately. No response from the landing party. Commander, how long since last contact?" 47 minutes and counting. Orders?" There was a pause before the commander's voice returned. Colder now. "Prepare to destroy the merchant vessel. If our warriors are dead, we will at least deny our enemies any profit from this encounter." Captain Valoris felt her blood turn to ice. "They're going to destroy us." "Probably," Marcus agreed, seemingly unconcerned. "Tessara, how long until our engines can restart?" The elderly engineer checked her datapad. 20 minutes minimum. The Korthak used some kind of disruptor field to lock down our systems." "That's too long," David said, monitoring the enemy communications. "They're already charging weapons." Marcus walked over to examine one of the fallen Korthak warriors more closely. He began stripping away pieces of the alien's armor and equipment with practiced efficiency. "What are you doing?" Captain Valoris asked. "Getting dressed for a social call," Marcus replied, pulling the warrior's helmet over his head. The Korthak armor was too large for his human frame, but he made adjustments with strips of fabric torn from his apron. "Captain, I need you to record a message." "A message?" "To the Korthak ship. Tell them their boarding party has secured the vessel and is ready for the commander to come aboard and inspect the cargo personally. Make it sound official." Captain Valoris shook her head. "They'll never believe it. The voices don't match, and they will if you modify the signal." Marcus interrupted, handing her a device he'd taken from the Korthak leader. "Run the audio through this first. It'll make any voice sound Korthak." David looked up from the communications array. "How do you know so much about their technology?" "I read a lot," Marcus said simply, checking the power cell on a captured plasma rifle. "Captain, we need that message now." "They're almost ready to fire." With trembling fingers, Captain Valoris activated the voice modulator and spoke into the comm unit. The device transformed her musical Zentari tones into the harsh growl of a Korthak warrior. "Commander, this is Boarding Team Alpha. Merchant vessel is secured. Recommend you come aboard personally to inspect the quantum crystal shipment. Cargo is unusual. Requires your expertise to evaluate properly. The response came back within moments. Confirmed, Alpha Team. Maintaining position for Commander's shuttle launch. Well done. Marcus nodded approvingly as he finished adjusting the alien armor. That should buy us some time. Tessera, how are those engines coming? Still 15 minutes, she replied. Marcus, what are you planning? A little misdirection, he said, moving toward the airlock. If anyone asks, I went to check on dinner. Should be back in about 10 minutes. Wait, Captain Valoris called after him. You can't seriously be planning to board their ship alone. There are at least 50 Korthak warriors over there. Marcus paused at the airlock controls. Actually, closer to 80, based on the ship class. But most of them will be busy with other duties. I only need to deal with maybe 20 or 30. The casual way he said it made Captain Valoris's heart skip a beat. Marcus, please, tell us who you really are. What you really are? For a moment his cheerful demeanor slipped and she saw something dark and tired in his eyes. I'm exactly what I said, Captain. I'm a cook. Everything else is just job training from a previous career. What kind of job requires training like this? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his hand resting on the airlock release. The kind where you solve problems that can't be solved with words or diplomacy. The kind where entire star systems depend on one person making the right choice, no matter how terrible that choice might be. He activated the airlock and stepped inside. The kind of job that gets you exiled when the people who hired you decide your methods are too dangerous. Even for them. The airlock cycled and he was gone. Captain Valoris turned to her remaining crew, seeing her own shock reflected in their faces. David was the first to speak. He's not just any assassin, is he? The young man said quietly. The way he moves, the things he knows. I've heard stories about human covert operatives, but I thought they were legends. Tessera pulled up a secure data terminal and began searching through classified databases with her engineer's access codes. There, she said after several minutes. Look at this. The file was heavily redacted, but enough information remained to paint a terrifying picture. Marcus Chen, former operative of the Terran Tactical Solutions Division, confirmed eliminations classified. Methods employed classified. Reason for termination of service. Excessive collateral damage during Operation Nightfall. Subject's tactical decisions deemed incompatible with current military doctrine. But it was the final notation that made Captain Valoris's blood run cold. Caution. Subject's combat techniques have been classified as forbidden methods under Galactic Warfare Convention Article 47 use. Of these techniques is considered a war crime. In all 12 member systems of the Central Alliance, what did we hire? David whispered. Before anyone could answer, the lights flickered again. This time, though, it wasn't their own ship experiencing power fluctuations. Through the cargo hold's small viewport, they could see the massive Korthak warship in the distance. Its lights were going out one by one, section by section, as if something was moving through the vessel, systematically shutting down its systems. He's actually doing it, Tessera breathed. One man is taking apart an entire Korthak battlecruiser. Captain Valoris found herself praying to ancestors she hadn't thought about in years. Not for Marcus's safety. Somehow she suspected he didn't need her prayers for that. Instead, she prayed that when he came back, he would still be the gentleman who had served them meals and told quiet jokes during long space flights. She had a terrible feeling that the Marcus Chen who returned might be someone very different from the cook they'd thought they knew. In the distance, the Korthak ship's engines went dark. Marcus moved through the Korthak warship like a ghost. The stolen armor had gotten him past the initial security checkpoints, but now he relied on skills that had been burned into his muscle memory during years of operations across human space and beyond. The ship's design was typical, Korthak military, brutal efficiency with no consideration for comfort or aesthetics. Corridors were narrow and poorly lit, designed to funnel invaders into killing zones. Unfortunately for the ship's designers, Marcus wasn't a typical invader. He'd entered through the shuttle bay, where the commander's personal transport was being prepared for launch. The bay crew had barely glanced at him, just another warrior heading to his post. 3 quick strikes had left them unconscious and hidden behind cargo containers. From there, he'd made his way to the ship's power distribution center. Korthak vessels were notorious for having centralized systems, a design flaw that Marcus had exploited before. A few precisely placed charges in the right locations would cripple the ship without destroying it outright. As he worked, Marcus allowed his mind to slip back into patterns he'd hoped never to use again. Every corner could hide an enemy. Every sound might be a warning. Every decision had to be made with lethal efficiency because hesitation meant death, not just for him, but for the innocent crew back on the Prosperity. The first patrol found him as he finished placing the charges in the power center. 3 Korthak warriors rounded the corner, their weapons already drawn. They'd been suspicious about the missing shuttle bay crew. Halt. Identify yourself. Marcus raised his hand slowly, allowing them to see he was apparently unarmed. Power systems check, he said, his voice modulator making him sound like one of their own. Engineering sent me to investigate fluctuations. The lead warrior stepped closer, his reptilian eyes narrowing. I know every engineer on this ship. You are not one of them. New transfer, Marcus replied calmly. From the Bloodfang. It was a reasonable lie. The Bloodfang was a known Korthak vessel that operated in this sector. But the warrior's suspicion was growing, and Marcus could see the man's finger moving toward his weapon's trigger. Show me your transfer orders, the warrior demanded. Of course, Marcus said, reaching slowly toward his belt. Instead of documents, his hand found the combat knife he'd concealed beneath the stolen armor. The blade took the first warrior in the throat before he could cry out. Marcus spun, catching the second warrior's rifle barrel and redirecting it as the weapon discharged harmlessly into the corridor wall. A quick strike to the nerve cluster at the base of the Korthak's skull dropped him instantly. The third warrior had time to raise his weapon, but Marcus was already moving. Years of training had taught him to read an opponent's intentions from the smallest muscle movements. He knew where the shot would go before the trigger was pulled, and he wasn't there when the plasma bolt arrived. His knife found the gap in the warrior's armor with surgical precision. All 3 enemies were down within seconds, their bodies hidden behind the power distribution panels. Marcus continued deeper into the ship, following memorized schematics. Korthak military vessels were standardized. He'd studied their designs extensively during his active years. Bridge would be 12 levels up. Command center would be defended by at least 2 squads, and the commander would have personal bodyguards with enhanced armor. But Marcus wasn't planning to take the bridge by force. That would be noisy, messy, and ultimately pointless. Instead, he had a more elegant solution in mind. The ship's life support center was located deep in the vessel's core, protected by multiple security checkpoints. Marcus bypassed them all, using maintenance shafts and service corridors that the ship's designers had never intended for human-sized infiltrators. When he reached the life support center, he found 2 technicians monitoring atmospheric controls. They looked up in surprise as he dropped through a ceiling access panel, but neither had time to sound an alarm. Marcus didn't kill them. Instead, he used pressure points to render them unconscious. They would wake up in a few hours with headaches but no permanent damage. Despite what his files might suggest, he'd never enjoyed killing. It was simply a tool he used when other options weren't available. Working quickly, he began reprogramming the ship's atmospheric controls. Not to poison the air. That would be too crude and might harm prisoners or non-combatants aboard the vessel. Instead, he adjusted the oxygen mixture to create a mild narcotic effect. Nothing dangerous, but enough to make the crew drowsy and slow their reaction times. As the modified atmosphere began circulating through the ship, Marcus made his way toward the command center. He could hear increased chatter on the internal communications. The missing patrol had been discovered, and security alerts were spreading throughout the vessel. All sections report, the commander's voice echoed through the corridors. We have an intruder aboard. No one moves alone. All patrols in groups of 5 or more. Marcus smiled grimly. 5 warriors were barely more challenging than 3, and the adjusted atmosphere would start affecting them within minutes. But he had to move quickly before they realized what was happening, and switched to emergency breathing apparatus. He found the first patrol group in Corridor 7, moving in tight formation with weapons raised. They were well-trained and disciplined, but they were also starting to feel the effects of the modified air. Their movements were slightly sluggish, their reaction times a fraction slower than normal. It was enough. Marcus dropped from an overhead vent directly into their midst. His first strike took out the squad leader before any of them realized he was there. The second warrior turned toward the commotion, but Marcus was already behind him. Pressure point strike to the base of his skull, dropping him instantly. The remaining 3 managed to raise their weapons, but the narcotic effects of the atmosphere made their movements clumsy. Marcus flowed between their shots like water, each movement calculated to bring him closer to his targets while keeping them from getting a clear shot. Within 30 seconds, all 5 warriors were unconscious on the deck. The ship's internal communications crackled with increasing urgency. Security Team Alpha, report your status immediately. Security Team Beta, respond. All teams fall back to the command center. Establish defensive perimeter. Marcus checked his chronometer. The atmospheric modifications would take another 10 minutes to reach full effect throughout the ship. He needed to reach the command center before they sealed themselves in with independent air supplies. Moving through the corridors now required more caution. The remaining crew members were alert and frightened, which made them dangerous. But it also made them predictable. Fear caused beings to make tactical mistakes, to choose obvious defensive positions, and panic when those positions were compromised. He reached the command center's outer perimeter to find exactly what he'd expected: a hastily assembled defensive line with warriors, positioned at every corridor intersection. They'd turned off the main lighting and were using tactical illumination, creating a maze of shadows and bright spots that would confuse most intruders. Unfortunately for them, Marcus had trained extensively in zero-light combat scenarios. He could navigate and fight in complete darkness using only sound and air movement to track his targets. The first perimeter fell within minutes. Warriors who thought they were safely hidden behind bulkheads and defensive barriers found themselves facing an enemy who seemed to materialize out of thin air. Marcus used their own defensive positions against them, turning cover into traps and sowing confusion throughout their ranks. By the time he reached the command center's main entrance, most of the ship's security force was either unconscious or too affected by the atmospheric modifications to mount effective resistance. The blast doors were sealed, but Marcus had expected that. He placed a small-shaped charge at the door's locking mechanism, not enough to breach the heavy barrier, but sufficient to disable the electronic locks. As the charge detonated, Marcus stepped back and waited. The Korthak inside would assume he was trying to break down the door, and they'd concentrate their defenses on the main entrance. They would be wrong. Marcus made his way to the command center's secondary access point, a maintenance shaft that connected to the bridge's environmental systems. It was barely large enough for a human, but that was exactly why it would be unguarded. 20 minutes after boarding the Korthak warship, Marcus dropped through a ceiling panel directly onto the command center's bridge. The Korthak commander and his senior officers looked up in shock as this impossible human figure landed among them with casual grace. Their weapons were already drawn, but they hesitated for just a moment, long enough for Marcus to assess the tactical situation and plan his next moves. "Gentlemen," he said pleasantly, straightening his stolen armor, "I believe you wanted to destroy my ship. I'd like to discuss alternative arrangements." The Korthak command center fell silent except for the hum of ship systems and the ragged breathing of officers who couldn't quite believe what they were seeing. Commander Thakmor, a scarred veteran of a dozen campaigns, stared at the human who had somehow appeared in the most secure location on his warship. "Impossible," the commander growled, his massive form rising from the command chair. "No single being could penetrate our defenses." Marcus glanced around the bridge, noting the positions of the 8 officers present, their weapons, and the various control stations. "Your security is actually quite good," he said conversationally. "It's just designed to stop conventional boarding parties. Not someone with my particular skill set." The ship's tactical officer, a younger Korthak with fresh battle scars across his snout, raised his plasma rifle toward Marcus. "Commander, I have a clear shot." "Wait," Commander Thakmor commanded, his eyes never leaving Marcus. "I want to understand how this happened." He activated his personal communicator. "All sections report status." The responses that came back painted a grim picture. Security teams throughout the ship reported their personnel unconscious or missing. Life support showed atmospheric anomalies. The power distribution center had been sabotaged, though backup systems were maintaining essential functions. "One human did all this?" the tactical officer asked in disbelief. "Apparently so," the commander replied. He studied Marcus with the calculating gaze of a predator recognizing another apex hunter. "What are you, human?" Marcus removed the Korthak helmet, revealing his gray-streaked hair and unremarkable face. "Like I told your boarding party, I'm a cook. But I used to have a different job." "What kind of job?" "The kind that pays well but has terrible retirement benefits," Marcus replied with a slight smile. "The kind where you learn that violence is just another tool, like a knife or a heat regulator. Useful when applied correctly, disastrous when used carelessly." Commander Thakamor's eyes narrowed. "You speak like a warrior, but you look soft, weak." "Appearances can be deceiving," Marcus said. "For instance, you probably think that having 8 armed officers on this bridge gives you an advantage. Does it not?" Marcus shook his head. "Not really. Your tactical officer is holding his rifle too high. The barrel angle will send his shot over my left shoulder. Your navigation officer has his sidearm holstered on his right hip, but he's left-handed, so he'll need an extra half-second to draw across his body. Your communications officer is trying to quietly signal for backup, but your internal communications are compromised. I rerouted them through the ship's entertainment system about 5 minutes ago." As if to demonstrate his point, music began playing over the ship's intercom system, a cheerful Terran folk song that seemed absurdly out of place in the grim command center. "Your chief engineer is reaching for the emergency lockdown controls," Marcus continued. "But those were disabled when I modified your power distribution systems. Your weapons officer thinks he can activate the ship's point defense systems to target me, but I've already introduced a small virus into your targeting computers. They'll identify me as a friendly Korthak officer." The weapons officer looked down at his console in alarm, frantically checking his systems. His expression confirmed Marcus's words. "And your second in command," Marcus said, glancing at a hulking Korthak near the back of the bridge, "is wondering if he can circle around behind me while I'm distracted by conversation." The answer is no. I can hear his breathing change and smell the adrenaline spike. Also, there's a mirror surface on that control panel that shows me his exact position. Commander Thakamor slowly lowered his weapon. "What do you want?" "Very simple terms," Marcus replied. "You withdraw from this sector immediately. You release any prisoners you've taken from previous raids, and you spread the word that this shipping route is under the protection of, let's call it, independent security contractor. And if I refuse?" Marcus tilted his head thoughtfully. "Well, I could kill everyone on this bridge in about 12 seconds. Then I'd need to hunt down your remaining officers, disable your escape pods, and reprogram your ship's computer to broadcast a message to other Korthak vessels explaining why raiding merchant ships in this area is a bad idea." He paused, considering. "Of course, that would be quite a bit of work, and I do have dinner to finish preparing. So I'd prefer the peaceful solution." The tactical officer's finger tightened on his weapon's trigger. "Commander, he's bluffing." No human could. Marcus moved. The throwing knife appeared in his hand and crossed the bridge faster than the eye could follow, passing so close to the tactical officer's ear that it cut through several scales before embedding itself in the wall behind him. The officer froze, plasma rifle still raised but his finger no longer anywhere near the trigger. "That was a warning shot," Marcus said pleasantly. "The next one won't be." Commander Thakamor looked at his tactical officer, then at the knife buried in the bulkhead, then back at Marcus. "You could have killed him, of course. But dead officers can't spread the word about what happened here. Live ones can tell stories that might prevent future misunderstandings." The commander was quiet for a long moment, weighing his options. Finally, he spoke. "What guarantee do I have that you won't hunt us down if we withdraw?" "My word," Marcus replied simply. "I'm not interested in conquest or revenge. I just want to cook meals for my crew and travel in peace. But if you threaten them again, I'll have to come back to work permanently. And trust me, nobody wants that." There was something in his voice that made every warrior on the bridge instinctively step back. This wasn't a threat or a boast, it was a statement of fact delivered with the calm certainty of someone who had made such calculations many times before. "Very well," Commander Thakamor said finally. "We withdraw, but the other clans will not be bound by my agreement. They may still—" "Let me worry about the other clans," Marcus interrupted. "Word travels fast in criminal organizations. One ship, one story, and every raider in the sector will know that this route has become unprofitable." He retrieved his knife from the wall and slipped it back into its concealed sheath. "Oh, and Commander, when you release those prisoners, make sure they understand that they were freed by the Korthak commander's mercy, not by outside intervention. It'll be better for everyone's reputation that way." The commander nodded slowly. "You are Unusual for a human. So I've been told, Marcus replied. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a ship to return to and a meal to finish. The synthetic protein tends to get rubbery if you overcook it. He moved toward the maintenance shaft he'd entered through, then paused. Oh, one more thing. The atmospheric modifications I made will wear off in about an hour. Your crew will be fine, just a bit groggy, and the virus in your targeting systems will delete itself in 24 hours. Consider it a professional courtesy. As Marcus disappeared back into the maintenance shaft, Commander Thakmore turned to his bridge crew. The younger officers looked shaken, but the older veterans wore expressions of grim understanding. Sir, the tactical officer asked quietly. Who was that human? Commander Thakmore was silent for a moment before answering. Someone we should be very grateful we didn't have to fight seriously. Signal all Korthak vessels in this sector. Shipping route designation 77 Alpha is now off limits. Spread the word to the other clans as well. Sir, they'll want to know why. The commander looked at the spot where Marcus had stood, then at the knife mark in his bulkhead. Tell them the truth. Tell them we encountered a human who claimed to be a cook, and tell them that anyone who doesn't believe that story is welcome to test it personally. He activated the ship's general communications. All sections begin prisoner release procedures. Prepare for immediate departure from this sector. As the Korthak warship began its withdrawal, Commander Thakmore found himself wondering what kind of organization would have soldiers like Marcus Chen working as civilian cooks. And what would happen if that organization ever decided to stop being so civilized? He decided those were questions he never wanted answered. 2 hours later, Marcus returned to the Prosperity carrying several containers of what appeared to be exotic spices and cooking ingredients. He found the crew gathered in the common area, their faces a mixture of relief, bewilderment, and lingering fear. Sorry I'm late, he said, setting down his containers and removing the stolen Korthak armor. Their commissary was better stocked than I expected. Found some genuine Altarian peppercorns and what I think might be crystallized Jovian honey. Should make for some interesting meal variations. Captain Valoris stared at him. Marcus, the Korthak ship just jumped to hyperspace. Their entire fleet is withdrawing from this sector. Good, Marcus replied, hanging up his apron and washing his hands at the small galley sink. That should prevent any future interruptions to our shipping schedule. David Park leaned forward in his chair, wincing slightly from his head injury. What happened over there? How did you convince an entire Korthak battle group to retreat? Marcus began unpacking his acquired seasonings, examining each container with the careful attention of a craftsman evaluating new tools. I explained that their current business model was unsustainable in this particular area. They saw the logic in my argument. Just like that? Tessara asked skeptically. Well, there may have been some demonstration of the potential costs involved in maintaining their position, Marcus admitted. But ultimately it was a business decision. They're not stupid, just aggressive. When the risk-to-reward ratio changes sufficiently, they adapt. Captain Valoris activated her personal data pad and pulled up the sensor records from the past 2 hours. According to our scans, you disabled their entire security force, compromised their life support systems, neutralized their defensive capabilities, and somehow convinced their commander to not only withdraw, but to release all their prisoners from previous raids. Marcus paused in his unpacking. They had prisoners? According to the communications we intercepted, they're releasing 47 beings from various merchant vessels they've captured over the past 6 months. For the first time since his return, Marcus's casual demeanor slipped slightly. That's a good. Those people deserve to go home. The crew fell silent, each of them processing the implications of what they'd witnessed. Finally, it was David who spoke up. Marcus, we found your service record. What we could access of it anyway. Marcus continued organizing his spices, but his movements became more deliberate. I see. Terran Tactical Solutions Division, Captain Valoris said quietly. Forbidden combat techniques. War crimes tribunals. Operation Nightfall. The name of that final operation hung in the air like a curse, even in the Outer Rim territories. Whispered stories circulated about Nightfall, a covert mission that had supposedly prevented a system-wide war but had cost so many lives that the details remained. Classified years later, Marcus set down the container he'd been holding and turned to face his crew. For the first time in 3 months, they saw him without the gentle mask he'd worn since joining them. The man who looked back at them was older, harder, and carried a weight that seemed to press down on his shoulders like a physical burden. Operation Nightfall was necessary, he said simply. A terrorist organization called the Red Nova Syndicate had acquired weapons capable of sterilizing entire planets. They were planning to use them on civilian targets to force political concessions from multiple governments. He sat down at the common area table, his hands folded in front of him. Traditional military responses weren't possible. The syndicate was too well protected and too mobile. Diplomatic solutions had failed, so they sent me and my team to eliminate the threat by any means necessary. "How many people died?" David asked quietly. Marcus was silent for a long moment. The syndicate had approximately 12,000 members spread across 6 hidden bases. We eliminated them all within a 72-hour period. The number hit the crew like a physical blow. 12,000 deaths carried out by a single team in 3 days. It was a level of systematic killing that defied comprehension. The weapons were destroyed, Marcus continued. The threat was eliminated. 3 billion people across 7 star systems continued living their lives without ever knowing how close they'd come to extinction. But, Captain Valoris prompted, sensing there was more to the story. But the methods we used to accomplish the mission were deemed too extreme by the Terran Council. The techniques I'd developed, the technologies we'd employed, the psychological profiles we'd exploited, all of it was classified as forbidden under galactic warfare conventions. Marcus looked up at them, his eyes carrying a sadness that seemed bottomless. They were right to do so. What we did worked, but it changed us. Changed me. When you become that efficient at killing, when you reduce sentient life to tactical problems to be solved, something inside you breaks. Tessara leaned forward. "Is that why you became a cook?" "Partly," Marcus admitted. "But mostly because cooking is about creating something instead of destroying it. It's about nourishing life instead of ending it. It's about bringing people together instead of tearing them apart." He gestured toward the galley. "Every meal I prepare is a small act of creation. Every spice I blend, every dish I craft, it's proof that I can still make something beautiful instead of just making things dead." The crew absorbed this in contemplative silence. Finally, Captain Valoris spoke up. "What happens now? Do we need to worry about the authorities? About other organizations learning your identity?" Marcus shook his head. "The Korthak won't report what happened. It would damage their reputation too much. And my exile was unofficial, as far as most databases are concerned. Marcus Chen died in a shuttle accident 3 years ago. But you're still wanted for war crimes," David pointed out. "Technically, yes, but the people who issued those warrants also know that pursuing them would require admitting that Operation Nightfall existed, which would require explaining why it was necessary, which would require revealing information that every government in the galaxy wants to keep buried." Marcus stood up and returned to his spice containers. "So we have what you might call a mutually beneficial arrangement. I stay quiet about the things I know and they pretend I don't exist. And if they change their minds?" Captain Valoris asked. Marcus smiled, and for just a moment it wasn't entirely pleasant. "Then I'll have to remind them why they made the original arrangement." The implications of that statement settled over the crew like a chill. They were beginning to understand that their mild-mannered cook wasn't just a former assassin. He was someone that entire governments were afraid to pursue. "So what now?" Tessara asked. "Do we continue as before?" "If you'll have me," Marcus replied, his demeanor returning to its familiar gentleness. "I understand if you'd prefer to find a new cook at the next station. My presence does carry certain risks." Captain Valoris looked around at her crew, reading their expressions. David was still processing everything he'd learned, but he nodded slowly. Tessara's engineer's mind was probably calculating probabilities and threat assessments, but she seemed more curious than frightened. And Captain Valoris herself had to admit that having someone with Marcus's capabilities aboard might not be entirely disadvantageous in the dangerous regions where merchant vessels operated. "I think we can work something out," she said finally. "But I have one condition. Name it, no more secrets. If we're going to continue working together, we need to know who we're really traveling with." Marcus considered this for a moment, then nodded. "Agreed, though I should warn you, some of the stories aren't very pleasant." "We'll manage," Captain Valoris said. "Now, I believe you mentioned something about dinner?" Marcus's face brightened, the shadows of his past receding as he focused on the present. "Right. I was thinking of trying a fusion approach with those Korthak spices. Should be interesting to see how Altarian pepper works with synthetic protein." As he bustled back to the galley, humming a cheerful tune, the crew exchanged glances. It was surreal watching this man who had just single-handedly neutralized a Korthak battle group return so seamlessly to worrying about meal preparation. But perhaps that was the point. Perhaps after years of being a weapon, Marcus had found peace in being useful in a different way. In feeding people instead of killing them, in solving problems with seasoning instead of violence, and if occasionally that meant protecting his friends with methods that were banned across 12-star systems, well, everyone had to have hobbies. The smell of cooking food began to fill the ship, and despite everything they'd learned, the crew found themselves looking forward to dinner. After all, whatever else Marcus Chen might be, he really was an excellent cook. And in the dangerous void between the stars, that was a talent worth keeping around.